When Hogan's Heroes premiered in 1965, three of the men in those Nazi uniforms had real numbers tattooed on their arms, or families lost to gas chambers. 6 decades later, every face you remember is gone, including the lead actor, found bludgeoned to death in a Scottsdale apartment. The first name belongs to the man whose face was on the poster. Bob Crane was a Connecticut kid who built himself into the highest-paid morning radio host in Los Angeles, making $75,000 a year at CBS station KNX, interviewing Marilyn Monroe and Frank Sinatra before breakfast. When CBS handed him the lead in their odd new prison camp sitcom in 1965, he was 37 and the future was wide open. For 6 seasons, he played Colonel Robert Hogan with a cocky radio DJ rhythm, fast-talking, half-grinning, the smartest man in the room without ever raising his voice. He earned 2 Emmy nominations. Then the show ended and the work stopped coming. Crane could not break out of Hogan. He did dinner theater tours of a comedy called Beginner's Luck and tried one more sitcom on NBC in 1975 that was canceled after 13 episodes. On the afternoon of June 29, 1978, Crane was in apartment 132A at the Winfield Place Apartments in Scottsdale, Arizona, on tour with Beginner's Luck at the local Windmill Dinner Theater. His co-star Victoria Berry came to the apartment when he failed to show for lunch and found him in his bed. He had been bludgeoned to death with a weapon investigators believed was a camera tripod, and an electrical cord had been tied around his neck. Bob Crane was 49. Crane was buried at Oakwood Memorial Park in Chatsworth, California, after a funeral attended by Robert Clary and Larry Hovis among the pallbearers. 21 years later, in 1999, his second wife, the woman who had played Hilda on the show under the stage name Sigrid Valdis, had his remains moved to Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. The shared marker she ordered, when she was buried beside him in 2007, reads, "Hogan and Hilda, together forever." The wholesome American everyman whose face sold a hit network sitcom carried a private camera obsession that police, after his death, found in stacks of videotapes throughout his apartment. The killer was almost certainly someone he knew. Nobody has ever been convicted. That is the contradiction Bob Crane left behind. The second name on this story is the man who, week after week, made an audience laugh at a Nazi commandant, and was, off-camera, a Jewish refugee who had personally fled Hitler. Werner Klemperer was born in 1920 in Cologne, son of conductor Otto Klemperer, one of the most famous classical musicians of the 20th century. The family escaped to Los Angeles in 1933 when Werner was 13. In 1942, he enlisted in the United States Army and spent 3 years in the Pacific entertaining troops with special services. When he was offered Colonel Wilhelm Klink in 1965, he had one condition. He would play the role only if Klink was guaranteed to fail in every scheme. Never the hero, never the winner, always the pompous, monocled, terrified middle manager who believed he ran a perfect prison camp while every prisoner was running an underground spy ring beneath his feet. He was the only actor on Hogan's Heroes to win an Emmy, and he won it twice, in 1968 and 1969. 5 other years saw him nominated. After the show ended, he largely walked away from television and devoted himself to music, narrating with virtually every major American symphony orchestra. In 1987, he returned to Broadway in a revival of Cabaret, playing the Jewish shopkeeper Herr Schultz, and earned a Tony nomination. Klemperer married 3 times. The marriage that lasted, the one he was inside of when the cancer reached him, was to actress Kim Hamilton. He died at home in Manhattan on December 6, 2000, at the age of 80. His ashes were scattered at sea. The man whose family had crossed an ocean to escape the Nazis ended up returned to that ocean with no marker, no plot, no headstone. A Jewish refugee from Hitler's Germany, spent 6 years on television playing a Nazi colonel and won every available award for the performance because of one rule he refused to break. The man Otto Klemperer's son became was, in the end, the most precise satirist of the regime that had once tried to kill him. The third entry takes us out of Hollywood and back to Texas, where the cheerful demolition man of Hogan's Heroes ended his career as a college professor. Larry Hovis was born in 1936 in Wapato, Washington, within the boundaries of the Yakima Nation, and grew up in Houston. He sang from age 5 and ended up on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts. While earning a philosophy degree at the University of Houston, he signed with Capitol Records. By 1965, he was cast in only the pilot of Hogan's Heroes, but 2 other actors backed out, and Sergeant Andrew Carter became his. He played the wide-eyed American explosives expert with a charm that turned naivete into warmth. In 1995, his wife of 35 years, Carol Ann Corrigan, died of cancer. He kept teaching drama at Texas State University in San Marcos, where he had taken a faculty position in 1990. 8 years later, esophageal cancer reached him too. Larry Hovis died on September 9, 2003, at Hospice Austin's Christopher House at the age of 67. 4 children, 3 grandchildren, and a scholarship fund the university created in his name survived him. His ashes were scattered, the location never publicly disclosed. The brightest, most boyish face among the prisoners belonged to a quiet teacher who buried his wife of 3 decades and kept showing up to class anyway. That Houston kid ended where most of his life had actually been spent, in a Texas drama department, surrounded by students who would never know that the soft-spoken man at the front of the room was the same Sergeant Carter their parents had grown up watching. The 4th name carries more weight than any other person on this list. Robert Clary was born Robert Max Wiederman in Paris in 1926, the youngest of 14 children in an Orthodox Jewish family. He started singing on French radio at 12. At 16, he was performing at a cabaret in Normandy when the Germans came for him. In September 1942, Clary and 12 other members of his immediate family were deported to the Nazi concentration camp at Ottmuth. There he was tattooed with the number A5714. He was moved through Blockhammer, Gross Rosen, and finally Buchenwald, where he survived 31 months by singing every other Sunday for an audience of SS soldiers. The singing earned him a few extra crusts of bread. His parents and 10 of his siblings were sent to Auschwitz on the same day he was sent to Ottmuth, and they were gassed that day. American troops liberated Buchenwald on April 11, 1945. Clary returned to Paris and found that 3 of his siblings had survived the Nazi occupation in hiding. Clary moved to Los Angeles in 1949 and was mentored by Eddie Cantor. In 1965, almost exactly 20 years after his liberation, he was cast as Corporal Louis Lebeau on Hogan's Heroes, a French POW chef in a fake German prison camp, played by a man with the real number A5714 on his arm. He stayed publicly silent about his past for 36 more years. The rise of Holocaust denial in 1980 broke his silence, and he began touring schools to testify about what he had seen. His 2001 memoir captured the rest. He married Natalie Cantor-Metzger, daughter of Eddie Cantor, in 1965. The marriage lasted 32 years until her death in 1997. Robert Clary died of natural causes at his home in Los Angeles on November 16, 2022, at the age of 96, having outlived every other principal cast member who had been on screen at the start of the show. His ashes were scattered at sea, the same place Werner Klemperer's ashes were scattered 22 years earlier. 2 Jewish men whose lives had been bent by the Nazis, both ultimately released to the same water. The man who looked like the lightest-hearted hero on the show carried the camp number A5714 on his arm during every minute of every episode, and lived to 96 because of a few minutes of singing every other Sunday for the men who would have killed him otherwise. That arithmetic, once you see it, changes everything about what was actually happening on that set. Of these 8, which story is sitting with you the longest? Tell me in the comments. There are still 4 more to go. The 5th name became, eventually, more famous as a game show host than as a Hogan's Heroes prisoner. Richard Dawson was born Colin Lionel M. on November 20, 1932 in Gosport, Hampshire, England. As a child during the war, he was evacuated from Gosport to escape the bombing of southern England, which is why he attended school regularly for only about 2 years. At 14, he left home and joined the British Merchant Navy, boxed for prize money on ships, and performed stand-up comedy in London. His casting as Corporal Peter Newkirk on Hogan's Heroes came after a small role in the 1965 film King Rat. For 6 seasons, he played the smooth Cockney conman, the forger, the lockpicker, and the camera kept finding him in scenes he was not supposed to be the focus of. He chain-smoked almost 4 packs a day, every day, for decades. After Hogan's Heroes, he became a regular panelist on Match Game. In 1976, the producers spun off a new game show built around him called Family Feud, and the rest of his career became something almost separate from anything he had done before. He hosted Family Feud through the late 70s and into the 80s, and won the Daytime Emmy in 1978. He kissed every female contestant on the cheek for love and luck, a practice he later said came from his mother kissing him goodbye during the wartime evacuation. Diana Dors was his first wife, the British actress sometimes called the British Marilyn Monroe, and they had 2 sons before divorcing in 1967. By 1979, he was guest hosting The Tonight Show 14 times a year and being publicly considered as Carson's replacement. Carson stayed. In May 1981, a contestant named Gretchen Johnson appeared on Family Feud. They married 10 years later, after the birth of their daughter Shannon Nicole in 1990. Shannon talked him into quitting smoking in 1994, but the damage was already done. Richard Dawson died of esophageal cancer on June 2, 2012, at the Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center, at the age of 79. He is buried at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Westwood, Los Angeles, Section D, in the central lawn between 2 trees, just yards from Roy Orbison's unmarked grave. Bob Crane was already buried in the same cemetery when Dawson arrived. 2 Hogan's Heroes co-stars, separated in life by accents and continents, ended up sharing a small patch of California grass. The boy who left school at 14 and raised himself on merchant ships built his most famous ritual out of the most private one of his childhood. America's most public daytime face in the 1970s belonged to a man whose mother had kissed him goodbye on a train platform during a bombing. And he never stopped trying to give that kiss back. The 6th entry takes the camera back to Vienna, where the gentlest German on television actually came from. John Banner was born Johann Banner on January 28, 1910, in Stanislau, a town that today sits inside the borders of Ukraine. His family was Jewish. He dropped out of the University of Vienna after 2 semesters and joined a theater company. By the late 1930s, he was a working actor on stage in Switzerland. The night of the Anschluss in March 1938 caught him on tour in Zurich, and he stayed there. The Nazis briefly captured him during a return trip and held him in a pre-war concentration camp before releasing him. He escaped to the United States in 1939. His parents and siblings did not. They were murdered at the Mali Trostenets concentration camp in 1942. Banner enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps the following year, a Jewish refugee in the uniform of the army that would defeat the regime that had killed his family. For 2 decades, Hollywood typecast him as Nazi after Nazi. When Hogan's Heroes premiered in 1965, Sergeant Hans Schultz, the rotund German guard who refused to see what was happening in the camp, became his life's work. Audiences quoted his line, "I see nothing, I know nothing," for 50 years. The phrase, Sergeant Schultz defense, entered American political language because of him. He married Christine Gemona, a Frenchwoman, in June 1965, 3 months before Hogan's Heroes went on the air. After the show ended in 1971, they bought a home in France and prepared to retire there. In January 1973, the couple traveled to Vienna to wait for a furniture shipment. While visiting friends, he suffered an abdominal aortic aneurysm hemorrhage. He died at Vienna's Sophian Hospital on January 28, 1973, his 63rd birthday. Banner was interred at Friedhof Mauer in southwest Vienna, in Group 57, Row 2, Number 26. 15 years later, in 1988, the Austrian-style cemetery lease on his plot expired, and a family named Hübner took it over. The original tombstone was removed. The marker today reads, Hübner Johann, 1926 to 1988. Banner's body remains buried beneath it. A small German-language plaque, placed by fans, confirms what the official stone does not, that this is where Sergeant Schultz actually rests. The cuddly Nazi guard who said, "I know nothing" every week was an Austrian Jew whose entire family had been murdered in a real concentration camp 3 decades earlier. That weekly line was, in a sense, the most savage joke ever written into an American sitcom, delivered by the man who knew the truth most personally. If these stories matter to you, subscribe to keep them coming. A few names a week, all of them remembered properly. 7th on this list is the only black actor in the Hogan's Heroes ensemble, and the only one of the original cast to leave the show before it ended. Ivan Nathaniel Dixon III was born April 6, 1931 in Harlem. His father, a World War I veteran, owned a Harlem grocery store. His mother ran a bakery. As a child, he lived on the same block as the singer Josh White and the writer Ralph Ellison. He graduated from North Carolina Central University in 1954. 5 years later, he originated the role of Joseph Assagai in the Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun and reprised it in the 1961 film. In 1964, he starred in Nothing But a Man, an independent drama about a black railroad worker in the segregated South, still considered, 6 decades later, one of the most uncompromising portrayals of black life ever put on American screens. The next year, he was cast as Sergeant Kinchlow on Hogan's Heroes. He stayed 5 seasons before walking out, the only original cast member to leave before the finale. Hollywood never gave him another role on the level of Nothing But a Man, so he became a director instead. From 1970 to 1993, he directed episodes of The Waltons, The Rockford Files, Magnum P.I., and dozens of other series. In 1973, he directed The Spook Who Sat by the Door, a film about the first black CIA officer using his training to lead an armed uprising. It was pulled from circulation and is now treated as one of the most subversive black political films ever made in America. Off camera, he had been a civil rights organizer since 1961. His wife, Burley Ray, met him as a fellow drama student at North Carolina Central. The marriage lasted 58 years and produced 4 children. 2 of those children died before he did. And Guy, a former child actor, died in 1986 at the age of 27. Yvonne IV also predeceased him. Daughter Doris went on to become a documentary filmmaker. Yvonne Dixon retired in the mid-1990s and moved to Hawaii, where he owned and operated a radio station. On March 16, 2008, he died of complications from kidney failure at Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, at the age of 76. Burley was with him. She joined him in 2019. He was cremated. The location of his ashes has never been disclosed. The calm black presence on a 1960s prison camp comedy was, on weekends and evenings, a civil rights organizer quietly building one of the most radical black political films ever shot in this country. American audiences saw him as Hogan's quiet sergeant. Off camera, he was the man who refused to be quiet about anything that actually mattered. The final name on the call sheet outlived everyone else. Leon Askin was born Leo Ashkenazi on September 18, 1907 in Vienna, Austria-Hungary, into a Jewish family. He studied acting under Max Reinhardt and Louise Dumont, and by his mid-20s was performing at the Dumont Playhouse in Düsseldorf, Germany. In 1933, the Nazis fired him for being Jewish. The SA arrested him in April of that year, and the SS beat him. He fled to Paris, returned briefly to Vienna, and fled again after the Anschluss of 1938. The French government interned him at the start of the war as an enemy refugee. He was released and reached New York in 1940. His parents, Malvin and Samuel Ashkenazi, did not get out. They were murdered at the Treblinka extermination camp. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps and became a U.S. citizen in 1943, ending the war as a technical sergeant. The Vienna that had once arrested him was now the Vienna his uniform was helping to liberate. After the war, he went to Hollywood, where studios cast him as foreign character after foreign character: Russian composers, Eastern European villains, German generals. In 1961, he played a Soviet apparatchik in Billy Wilder's 1, 2, 3, opposite James Cagney. The Hogan's Heroes producers cast him in 1965 as General Albert Burkhalter, the looming Luftwaffe officer who terrified Klink across 67 episodes. Children never came. He was married 3 times, the longest marriage to Anneliese Ehrlich until her death in 1994. In that same year, he did something most refugees of his generation never managed to do. He went home. Vienna, the city he had been driven out of, became his home again at the age of 86, and in 1997 he sat for a long oral testimony with the USC Shoah Foundation Institute about everything he had seen. Vienna gave him back what it had taken. He received the Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art in 1988 and the Gold Medal of Honor for Services to Vienna in 2002. After his death, the city named a public square after him in Vienna's Penzing district, raised a bust of him in Türkenschanz Park, named a public housing block for him in 2009, and named a public park for him in 2010. Leon Askin died of natural causes in a Vienna hospital on June 3, 2005, at the age of 97. He is buried at the Wiener Zentralfriedhof, Vienna's central cemetery, alongside Beethoven, Brahms, Schubert, and Strauss. He outlived the lead of Hogan's Heroes by 27 years, the show itself by 34, and Adolf Hitler by 60. The man Vienna had once beaten in the street was the man Vienna eventually decided to honor in stone and bronze, and the names of streets. And that arc, from the SS interrogation room to the bronze bust, is the kind of ending nobody in 1933 would have written for him. 2 oceans, 2 Vienna cemeteries, a shared marker in Westwood, and 3 patches of unnamed ground. That is where the 8 of them are now.